And welcome back for our final lecture. Today we're going to be talking about the lessons 146 through 149 in your book, The New Millennium. So let's go ahead and let's get started. America in 2000. People around the world recognize the year 2000 as a milestone. The official population in 2000 in America was 281,421,906 people, an increase of 32.7 million people over 1990. About 4 million babies were born, and about 2.4 million people passed away in the year 2000. Census returns indicate that the population was about 75.1% white, 12.3% African American, 3.6% Hispanic, or Asian, and the Hispanic population, which was a separate category from race, equaled about 13%. California was the most populous state, with 33.9 million residents, and Wyoming was the least populous state, with less than 500,000 people. The largest metropolitan statistical area, defined urban areas, was New York City, with about 50 metropolitan statistical areas with about 1 million or more people in existence. 80% of the population lived in metropolitan areas of 600,000 or more, while the other 20% lived in rural or non-urban areas. In 2000, America had 143.4 million women and 138.1 million men. The average life expectancy was about 76.7 years, with the median age being about 35.3 years, given that the baby boomers at this point in time were getting older and relatively fewer babies were being born. 28 million people lived in America. Million people living in America in 2000 were born in another country, and the number of legal immigrants who entered the country in 2000 was 841,002. The nation registered about 105.5 million households in 2000, with the average size of that household being about 2.59 people. Married couples accounted for 52% of all households, while single-person households accounted for 26%. Children 18 or younger were present in 36% of American homes, and 12% of American homes had a female single parent, while 4 had a male single parent. Now, the U.S. economy had a gross domestic product in 2000 of about $10 trillion, with 3 largest segments of the economy being service, the financial, industrial, and real estate sector, and the manufacturing sector. The rate for inflation in the year 2000 was about 3.4, and unemployment was at about 4%. Only about 2.5% of the American labor force was farm-based. By contrast, 72% of workers earned a living on farms in 1820. When it comes to religion, the single largest religious group in the year 2000 was the Roman Catholic Church, with about 62.4 million members. The largest Protestant denomination was the Southern Baptist Convention, with 15.9 million members. Many other religious groups claimed large numbers of adherents in 2000. Islam had about 5.8 million followers, Mormons had about 5.2 million followers, and Jewish followers totaled 4.4 million amongst the denominations. Now, in 2000s, the nation was at peace, the economy was strong, and the federal government was running at a surplus. The shadow of the Clinton years did hang over this period, though. For the presidential election, the Democrats chose Al Gore for their nominee, with Gore having to strike a balance between claiming success for the strong economy and distancing himself from Clinton's moral failures. The Republicans instead chose George W. Bush. I always want to flip these two. The Republicans chose George W. Bush, son of former President George H.W. Bush. Bush promised to restore dignity to the office of presidency. He proposed large tax cuts, he increased federal funding for education, and wanted to make schools accountable for how they educated students. On election night, Florida became the pivotal state in the election. Television networks first called the state for Gore, then retracted that call, and called it for Bush, saying that Bush had won the election. Gore called Bush to concede the election. As Gore was driving to the venue where he was to make his concession speech, he received word that the vote count in Florida was tightening and that the networks again retracted their call. Gore phoned Bush to retract his concession. The weeks of legal wrangling sought an answer as to who won Florida. The main question being the accuracy of the punch card readers at the time that were used to vote. The Democrats said that even though the chads, the little pieces of paper that were to be punched out, might not be completely detached from the card, election officials should count dimpled chads that may have been indented using the stylus meant for voting. Republicans argued that people might have started voting for Gore and then changed their minds, thus the dimpled chads were not an accurate representation of voter intent. Lawyers for the two parties argued in state and federal courts for and against manual recounts, while Florida election officials spent long hours holding punch cards up to the light to try to determine voter intent. The Florida Supreme Court ruled that more time needed to be allowed for recounts, a sentiment not shared by the U.S. Supreme Court. The Florida legislature voted to certify the Bush electors, and the final official total saw Bush winning Florida by a margin of 537 votes out of the over 6 million votes casted. Now, several months after the election, news organizations did go through the impounded ballots and actually confirmed that Bush had indeed won. Now, out of the 101 million votes cast, Gore won the popular vote by a bit over 50,000 votes. However, Bush won the electoral votes 271 to 266, with Florida's 25 electoral votes sealing his win. Because of the color coding actually used by television stations, states began being known as red states or blue states. The 107th Congress, convened in January of 2001, was also divided 50-50, up until the vice president voted. Then it became Republican-controlled, up until Republican Jim Jeffords switched to being independent and stated that he would vote alongside Democratic lines. The Republicans lost a vote and only had a 9-seat majority in this instance, but control was regained in the 2002 congressional election. When it comes to Secretary of State, President Bush selected Colin Powell to be the first African-American Secretary of State. A tax cut to be phased out over 10 years was passed in 2001 by Bush, and a campaign reform bill was passed in 2002 that outlawed what was known as soft money, certain kinds of contributions to political parties, and regulated the kinds of ads that could be run before Election Day. His major bit of legislation that he passed was the No Child Left Behind Act, passed in 2002. This increased federal involvement in education by requiring local school districts to meet certain benchmarks for student achievement. If a school failed to meet these benchmarks, students could be enrolled at another school on parents' choice. Now, after September 11th, 2001, the War on Terror dominated Bush's presidency. The president's foreign policies and domestic proposals were influenced by the realities of the War on Terror. In the 2001 tax cuts, followed by increased spending and a declining economy from the War on Terrorism, resulted in huge federal deficits under Bush. In the 2004 election, Senator John Kerry won the nomination for Democrats and ran under criticism of Bush's war on Iraq and Bush's continual flip-flopping, as he put it, on the issues. Bush defended the effort in Iraq and his policies, and this 2004 election was a more decisive victory for Bush and the Republican Party. Bush won with 51% of the popular vote and a 286 to 252 electoral college win. In August of 2005, in his second term, the major issue was the devastation of New Orleans, Louisiana, and Mississippi due to Hurricane Katrina. Government response was slow on all levels, and much criticism of Bush's administration arose from this event. Regarding Supreme Court nominations during his tenure, Bush had 2 Supreme Court nominations, the first which Judge John Roberts, and the second, to replace Judge Sandra Day O'Connor, was Judge Samuel Alito. The 2006 congressional midterm election saw Democrats taking control of the House, and the end of Bush's presidency was marked by the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, called the Great Recession. But we'll get into that after we cover 9/11, because 9/11 is honestly still an influential event to this day. Around 8 a.m. on September 11th, 2001, 4 flights took off from East Coast airports. These were American Airlines Flights 11 and 77 and United Airlines Flights 175 and 93. Soon after each of these flights were airborne, each of these planes were taken over by passengers and changed course from their intended destinations. At 8:48 a.m., American Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Then at 9:30 a.m., United Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower. While not everybody could make it out, people began to evacuate both towers quickly and realized that this was not an accident. At 9:37 a.m., American Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. The section where it was hit was under construction, so relatively few people were in it. At 9:59 a.m., the South World Trade Center collapsed from structural damage, and United Flight 93 was crashed in a Pennsylvania field by 10:10 a.m. By 10:28 a.m., 1 hour and 48 minutes after the event began, the North World Trade Center collapsed from structural damage. Firefighters and other workers continued to help find survivors. 19 hijackers were involved in the event. 2,973 victims died during this event, including 400 firefighters and policemen who worked selflessly to get people to safety. 150 people more passed after this due to causes related to the 9/11 attacks. President Bush had been informed every step of the way regarding what was happening, and for the first time ever, all commercial aviation was grounded in the U.S. On the whole, the U.S. was in a state of shock over what had taken place. September 14th was declared a national day of mourning, and the president gave a speech that day. Mourning those who had passed in the attack. The stock exchange was closed until the following Monday after the event, and when stocks were reopened, prices plummeted as people began to fear the unknown. On September 12th, Osama bin Laden was named as the chief suspect behind these attacks. Bin Laden denied these accusations, but video footage shows him clearly indicating he was behind the plot. Bin Laden was born in 1957. After the death of his father, he inherited a huge fortune. He joined the fight of Islamic rebels in Afghanistan in the 1980s against Soviet troops who had been sent there to shore up a puppeteering government loyal to the USSR. Bin Laden later returned to Saudi Arabia and fiercely opposed Saudi cooperation with the United States during the Persian Gulf War. Because of his opposition to the Saudi monarchy, bin Laden was exiled from the country in 1991. He went to Sudan and reportedly established terrorist training camps there. Now, diplomatic pressure led to him being exiled from that country and his family disowning him. Bin Laden eventually went back to Afghanistan and was protected there by the government that was led by the Islamic Taliban faction, the word Taliban meaning learner. He set up additional training camps there for the Al-Qaeda terrorist network, Al-Qaeda in this instance meaning the base. Evidence linked bin Laden to the 1993 bombing in the World Trade Center garage, the killing of 18 U.S. soldiers in Somalia, the bombing of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, and the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen on October of 2000. So he had been linked to multiple previous terrorist attacks. Now, the response of Americans to the attack was both a surge in the public acknowledgement of God and Christian values and a renewed investment in patriotism. America became very used to being at war, with airport security tightening greatly after this event. Bush announced that the U.S. was declaring a war on terrorism. Congress immediately voted for billions of dollars to go to additional military spending, and NATO invoked for the first time ever the mutual defense provision of the NATO Charter, which says that an attack on one member is considered to be an attack on them all. Great Britain, Russia, China, and Pakistan all pledged support to America, and many countries, except for Pakistan, withdrew diplomatic recognition of the Taliban government in Afghanistan. The Taliban government and the al-Qaeda camps were the first targets in the War on Terror, beginning on October 7th. This led to the fall of the Taliban government, and new governments being instilled there. The dictator of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, was regarded as an international outlaw for years. With much fear of the potential of weapons of mass destruction being created in Iraq, on October 8, 2002, the U.S. Congress authorized force to be used against Iraq, and the UN Security Council warned Iraq of serious consequences if it did not disarm itself. It refused. March of 2003 saw Bush demanding that Saddam leave Iraq. When this was ignored, a coalition of countries began a military assault on Iraq. This was an overwhelmingly successful military assault, and by December of 2003, Saddam Hussein had been captured. By May 1st, 2003, Bush declared major combat in Iraq to be over and done with. Now, coalition forces controlled large amounts of Iraq, and many, if not most, Iraqis welcomed the promise of a new day of freedom. Workers built new schools and hospitals, and the shadow of the oppressive Saddam regime began to fade. An interim Iraqi government was formed, and a national election was set for January of 2005 to create an assembly that would name a provisional executive council and write a new Iraqi constitution. However, there were continued insurgent attacks that caused many American casualties and led opponents of Bush's policies to really question the benefit of a continual American presence there. Bush's approval ratings and the support of Americans for the war in Iraq declined in opinion polls as the conflict continued. And it turned out that there were no weapons of mass destruction were found in Iraq, although evidence showed that there had been at one time. In Afghanistan, American goal and Allied forces' goal was to capture or kill terrorists and to support the pro-American government there. Barack Obama was elected president in 2008 and pledged to end American involvement in Iraq. And to concentrate our forces in the battle against terrorism in Afghanistan. In 2009, Obama began withdrawing troops from Iraq, and the American military effort there ended in December of 2011. Now, the American military presence in Afghanistan continued, but it was reduced dramatically by the end of 2014. Some smaller terrorist attacks still took place, but the number of attacks was reduced because of American anti-terror operations around the world. On May 2nd, 2011, Navy SEALs Special Operations Forces invaded a compound near a military academy in Pakistan and killed Osama bin Laden. As President Obama said in announcing the successful raid, justice had been done. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 changed our perspective on life in America, and in America as an American, and in the world around us. The American government and the American military forces responded to the threat with determination and dedication to preventing further tragedy. Now, let's talk about the Barack Obama administration, which we can only talk about to some degree because we haven't really had the time pass yet to really understand the major effects of said administration. Now, economic woes beset the last part of the George W. Bush presidency. A major issue was the credit crunch that climaxed in the fall of 2008, primarily related to the number of home mortgage failures in the U.S. Many lenders had approved mortgages for people who had less than excellent credit histories. However, whenever these people began defaulting on home loans, the growing number of houses on the market caused house prices to fall. This led to businesses being unable to get loans and companies beginning to lay off employees. This had major ripples throughout the economy. But the federal government took several steps to try to ease this financial crisis. The government borrowed money to send economic stimulus payments to taxpayers beginning in May of 2008. The U.S. government became involved in financial markets through bailouts for industry, and the interest rate for the Federal Reserve System was lowered between 0 and 0.25%. During this point in time, the Dow Jones Industry Average lost over half its value from its all-time high in 2007, and many state governments faced deficits. Senator Barack Obama won the Democratic nomination for the 2008 election, and Senator John McCain won the Republican nomination. Obama defeated McCain with a 52.7% of the popular vote and a 365 to 173 electoral college victory. Now, the Democrats gained a 57 to 41 majority in the Senate and controlled the House 257 to 178 seats. Obama had said during his campaign that the passage of a comprehensive health care law would be a major focus of his administration. The Patient Protection and the Affordable Care Acts were passed in early 2010, requiring every American to have health insurance or pay a fine. Along with this, all but the smallest of businesses must provide health insurance coverage to employees or pay a fine. But it also provided government subsidies for individuals with lower incomes. Also made it illegal for insurance companies to deny coverage to individuals based upon pre-existing conditions. Now, opposition to these bills led to the development of the Tea Party movement amongst conservatives, and critics charged the law with being an unconstitutional takeover of 1/6 of the nation's economy. Recovery in the recession was slow, to say the least. Unemployment reached its heights in 2010, with 9.6% of the American population being unemployed. The government continued spending outside of its means in order to keep the economy stimulated. Bailouts were given to GM and Chrysler, for example, in light of their bankruptcies. This recession, by economists, is said to have taken place from 2007 to 2009. But by 2010, many voters resented the sluggish economy and disapproved of the Affordable Health Care Act. In 2012, Obama ran for re-election against Mitt Romney. Romney was defeated 51 to 47 in popular vote and 332 to 206 in electoral votes. In 2011, Republican leaders in the House threatened shutdown of the federal government because they did not want to raise the debt ceiling without a commitment to cut the deficit of spending. This had also occurred in 2013. All of this resulted in a continuation of the tax cuts that had begun 10 years ago, and payroll tax cuts to be ended, and spending on federal programs to continue. Some controversies that occurred during Obama's presidency, as we finish up, the policy of don't ask, don't tell was ended. Many states began legalizing same-sex marriage around this point in time. In 2012, the IRS admitted to scrutinizing conservative groups more when considering them for tax-exempt status. Obama requested the resignation of the commissioner of the IRS, after calling these actions misconduct and inexcusable. Also in 2012, it was revealed that the Obama administration had requested a court order to access phone records used by the Associated Press reporters. This was regarded by the Associated Press as a serious violation of the freedom of the press. The same year, the National Security Agency records showed that the Obama administration had requested metadata, and that was turned over regarding subscribers' phones, and a program that gathered personal info from Facebook, Google, and Microsoft being in place. During his first year in office, President Obama made many overtures to a few other countries, suggesting that he wanted the U.S. to have a different relationship with them. And after revolutions in the Arab Spring, the U.S. was forced to consider what its role should be in these sorts of situations, the US announced support of pro democratic efforts and provided military assistance to such goals. One main troubling event that took place on the American diplomatic post was on the American diplomatic post in Benghazi when it was attacked and the American ambassador and 3 others were killed in this event. The official explanation was that this was an unplanned riot, but evidence has come to light suggesting that this was a premeditated terrorist attack. Now, it's important to note that the election of Obama as our first African American president was a historical event, but we won't know the true effects of Obama's presidency until further on in history, which is why we can talk about the policies that were put into place and the events that happened, but not really talk about the major effects of his presidency because it's just too soon for us to call. But as we finish up, some last things to talk about before we end the year. Thank you guys so much for being such great students. You guys really have made my day coming in, getting to see you guys every Tuesday, especially as a first-year teacher. You guys have been wonderful. You've all done amazing this year, even in the face of extraordinary circumstances like these right now, where we're having to have classes online. Give yourselves a pat on the back, a clap, a round of applause, all of that. You guys have done amazing. Thank you so much for being such great students and for making my first year as a teacher that much more wonderful. If there's any assignments you'd like to turn in before the end of the year, please do so as soon as possible. The cutoff for turning things in, if you guys are missing anything or if you guys just need a little bit more time to complete assignments, is Friday, May 22nd, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. That is Friday, May 22nd at 11:59 p.m. I need time to be able to grade these before ThinkWave closes for the year. So that is my cutoff for accepting any assignments that are still either missing or that you need to complete. If I don't have a class with you next year, please don't hesitate to stop by and say hi. If you'd like to come in and just say hi and talk about how your life's been going, what's new, what's going on, or just to stop by and just say hello, please don't hesitate to lean in, stop by and say hi. And finally, have a great summer. I hope you guys get a chance to do plenty of things with your time, get to hang out with friends, get to go to the beach, get to go wherever you'd like to go. I hope you guys have an amazing summer, and I will see you guys in August. Bye-bye!